Hi, I'm Becky Mason. I am a friend of Jacques. And thank you, Jacques, so much for asking me to make this video for New Vision English School. I love that you are all learning English at the New Vision English School. We are very proud of Jacques and the things that he has done, and he speaks English very well. So I get to tell you a little story today, but first, I want to tell you that I live in Michigan, which is a state in the United States, and I have a family. I am married with 2 sons. This is my husband, Scott, my son, Jaden, and my son, Brody. Jaden is 17 years old, and Brody is 14 years old. And I have been to Jeremy. I love Jeremy. See my shirts. I love Jeremy. I have been there about 5 times. And I miss it very, very much. I am looking forward to coming back and visiting one day, hopefully very soon, if God lets me. And I am going to share with you a story today from the Bible. This is the story of David and Goliath, one of my favorite stories. And it is from the Bible, from the book of Samuel. So there were God's people, the Israelites, and then there were some of God's people's enemies, the Philistines. So God's people, the Israelites, and the Philistines. Israel had a lot of enemies, but the Philistines were some of the worst. And they were at war. So King Saul was the king of the Israelites. And then they came up against the Philistines. And the God's people would stand over here on one hill, and the enemies of God, the Philistines, would stand over on the other hill. And the Philistines had a mighty hero whose name was Goliath. Goliath was a big giant. He was huge. He was 9 feet tall, huge and big, and he wore really thick armor, heavy armor. He carried a big long sword and a big long spear and a shield and wore a helmet, and he was huge. And he would come out every single day and make fun of God's people. And he would say, "Your God can't save you. Who will fight me? Send someone to fight me. If we win, then you will be our slaves. But if you win, then we will be your slaves." Well, the Israelites were terrified of Goliath. He was big and mean, and they were scared. And every time Goliath came out to say those things to God's people, they would run and hide because they were afraid. Well, there was this little guy named David. David was a shepherd, and he was out in the fields. He was a shepherd. And David's older brothers were part of the army of Israel. And so one day, David's father said to him, "David, I want you to go take some bread and some cheese to your brothers and find out how they're doing. Find out how the war is going." And so David grabbed the cheese and the bread, and he went off on his way, and he came to where the armies of God, the armies of Israel, were fighting. And he went out to the front lines, and as soon as he got there, he heard Goliath on the other side of the valley taunting God's people, saying things like, "Your God can't save you. Come and fight me. Send someone to fight me." And David was like, "Who is this guy who thinks he's a big deal? He can't defy God and the armies of God." And then the Israelites started talking, and they said, "He's so scary. He's so scary." The King Saul said that anyone who defeats this Goliath can have one of his daughters for a wife, and then none of his family will ever have to pay these taxes that they have to pay. And so David said, "Is this true?" And he asked a couple other people, "Is this true? Is this true?" And all the people said, "Yep, that's what King Saul said." And so David was like, "I'll fight this guy. I will kill Goliath." King Saul found out that David was talking like this, and he said, "Send him to me. Bring David to me." And so David came before King Saul, and David said, "I will kill this enemy of God." And King Saul said, "No, you can't. You're too small. You're just a boy. And Goliath is a mighty giant, and he's been a warrior in battle his whole life." And David said, "I'm not afraid of him. because God is on my side. God is on our side. And he can't say things like that. And so King Saul finally said, okay. So King Saul gave David all of his armor, which was like big protective metal that they wore on their bodies to protect them from spears and swords and things. And David put it all on, but it was very heavy. And David was like, just said, I can't wear this. It's too heavy and it's too big for me. And so David took all the armor off and he left it. And all he grabbed was his slingshot and 5 little stones. And Saul said, you can't win. And David said, look, I am a shepherd. And when a bear or a lion comes to attack my sheep, I just hit them with a club or I sling a stone at them with my slingshot. And then I take the sheep out of their mouth. And I will do the same to this Philistine. I will kill him just like God gave me victory over the bear and the lion. God will give me victory over this giant. And so King Saul said, okay. And so off David went to meet with Goliath. He had his 5 little stones and his slingshot. And he went out started to cross the valley by himself. And Goliath came out, big mean Goliath, and he said, do you think I'm a dog and you're going to fight me with a stick? Who are you? You're too tiny. I can beat you. And David, you come at me with a sword and a spear, but I come at you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. And today, God will defeat you. And so David put the stone in his slingshot and he swung it around and he let it go. And that stone went through the air and it knocked Goliath right in the forehead. And Goliath toppled over dead. That day, a small boy beat the mighty giant Goliath because God was with David. God sent a rescuer to God's people. He sent David, a young shepherd, to rescue the people of God from the enemies of his people. And just like God sent David, later, God would send an even mightier warrior named Jesus who would fight for God's people and win and have victory. God loves you so much. Thank you for letting me share this story. And I hope that all goes well for you at the New Vision English School and that you all learn to speak wonderful English and then you'll teach me how to speak Creole.